Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome once again to Side Hustle Ideas. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today on this beautiful Monday morning. This is the live stream that I do roughly once a week, where we talk about entrepreneurship and side hustles. So if you have any ambitions to work for yourself one day, you have come to the right place, because that's what we're here to talk about. And this is primarily an interactive live stream. That means this is your big chance. Your moment of glory has finally arrived. It's here at long last. You can ask me questions. So if you're seeing my beautiful face, you should see somewhere in the vicinity of my face some kind of chat box. If you are a subscriber to my channel for any amount of time, you should be able to get in the chat box and participate and ask me questions. And that's kind of basically the point of these things. This is episode number 105 of Side Hustle Ideas. The title of this episode is How to Start and Scale Your Business with Minimal Investment. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As always, a shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much for your support. Check that out. Membership has its privileges. And also my Patreons, my super thanks donors. Those are always nice to get. And my viewers and participants. You guys are awesome. Thank you. If you weren't here, I wouldn't be here. So there you go. Okay, let's get into this today. How to start and scale your business with minimal investment. So there are a lot, and there always have been, a lot of rumors flying around about how one starts a business. And you could forgive people for thinking this stuff. I think it's been popularized in movies and Hollywood and pop culture, this kind of thing. So naturally, people just hear about that stuff and they just assume that's how you do it. An example of that is investment, almost the Silicon Valley type investment. And this idea that in order to start anything, you need to first go out and get tons and tons of cash. And that's what you should focus all of your efforts on. Because if you don't have a lot of investors and investment, then you're dead. That's the idea. Okay, that's a falsehood. That's not actually true. That is true for certain niches, certain types of businesses. For example, if you're doing an innovative tech startup and you are located in certain areas of the world, like Silicon Valley, then yes, that typically tends to be kind of the pattern of what we see. But to extend that and say, like, okay, if I'm going to start a drywall company or, some kind of more mundane SME or traditional type business, that I would go about that exactly the same way, that is simply false, okay, for a variety of reasons that we are probably going to get into today. So that's the idea. I see there are 6 people here. Thank you for being here. Get in the chat. Let me know what you guys are wondering about, what you're struggling with when it comes to this stuff. If you are a business owner, who's actually pulled the trigger on this and you're taking steps to learn how to do this or to actually do it, let me know what you're experiencing, what you're struggling with, what you're wondering about. Okay. So here's the deal. I don't actually have any notes about what to talk about, so I'm just going to do this off the top of my head. I want to encourage everybody out there to consider business as an alternative to being an employee your entire life. I think that, first of all, it is one alternative to getting a job, and it works for some people. It's not for everybody, but it works for some people, and it's going to be a beautiful thing, because not only do you learn how to convert your value into cash directly without needing an agent or an intermediary like an employer, but it also can fulfill a sort of creative type aspect of yourself where you have your own ideas, you have your own vision of how things should be, and you don't see anyone else doing that. So you decide, you know what, I'm going to do it, right? Think traditional inventor type mentality, right? The Thomas Edisons out there, the Nikola Teslas out there. This is something you can do, right? So this might be right for you, and you might be suited to this. So if that's you, I want to encourage you to do this. Now, a big challenge that people have, something that I've noticed over the years of of advising and coaching startup founders and small business owners is that, how can I put this? People might understand an industry or a topic or a particular area. For example, you might have a hobby that you're an expert in, some idiosyncratic thing, some like whether it's bike riding or, 3D printing or something like that, where you really know your stuff in, right? You're enthusiastic about it. You got your own ideas about how to improve some aspect of that industry, but you may not have a background in business. That's the key thing. Okay, so you might have, not to throw business jargon at you, but a depth skill set. You might have in-depth knowledge in a certain area, a technical area, and you have ideas of how to do something that you don't see being done, create a solution that you don't see being used in a particular technical area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand how to start a business in it, because business is the scientific study of how to make money. It's its own field of study, and it's different from the technical areas. So, for example, if you have an idea in the world of 3D printing, you're passionate about 3D printing, you have a lot of technical knowledge, you have a vision to create something, a product or a service that will improve in some way the world of 3D printing, right? And you want to go into business doing that, right? Does that necessarily mean you understand how to start a business? No, it doesn't. In order to learn that, you would study business, right? That's the field of study that teaches you how to turn your technical knowledge into a money-making, sustainable venture, right? That's the idea. So to succeed in business, usually you need two main skills. One is your technical skills in a certain area, okay? So 3D printing or bike riding or whatever it is, right? That you're going to be creating a solution for. And business, how to make money doing that idea. So that's the idea. So the two things are required. They go hand in hand. If you just want to do a hobby, okay, you have a passion, maybe you do a technical thing. You do, those people that sort of fly the little RC airplanes, stuff like that, remote control airplanes. They make models, replicas of real aircraft, but they're like 1/10 the scale or whatever they are, right? They got little jet engines in them and they're radio controlled. You have a controller, right? So those people that fly them all around, right? And, you might be firmly entrenched in that world. You're passionate about it. You go and you have your own model planes and you go and you fly them in conjunction with other people at events and things like this. And you're plugged into that world. You know all the products. You know all the enthusiasts. You know all the events and the associations that deal with that, right? Okay. And if you just want to keep it a hobby, that's fine. You don't need to know business. You don't need to know anything else. It becomes something that you pour money into, right? And you do it for fun, right? And that's perfectly fine. But the moment you say, okay, I want to make money with this, then the game changes. Now you're in the realm of business. It's no longer a hobby. It's a business. Your decisions are not guided by like a hobbyist, in terms of what satisfies you. Instead, they're governed by what will make you money, right? It's a totally different thing. Okay, you're not there to serve yourself anymore. You're there to serve customers or clients. That's the whole point, right? Okay, you're in the world of business. Welcome to hell. I actually regard business as a very good thing. It's actually an enabler. If you want to learn how to be able to do your hobby essentially as your day job, business is the key to that, right? It allows you to understand how one makes money. And the thing that I've learned over my career, which spans several decades, is that, contrary to, I know, what some people on the internet kind of believe, business isn't necessarily the slimy, underhanded, borderline evil kind of thing. It's actually a very positive thing. The idea is that if you can create value, right, for someone else, and they see the value in whatever it is that you've created, right, they want to pay you for it. It makes sense for them to pay you for it because they're receiving something they consider to be of value, right? That's the game. And whoever can create the most value to the most people generally tends to make the most money. That's how that works. So it's actually a very positive thing. That's the way I look at it. And that's what I observe. So with that in mind, that's the idea why someone would want to do this. So the question becomes, we come to the topic of today, how do you start and scale your business with minimal investment? Well, let me dispel a lot of the rumors right away, okay? That whole Silicon Valley model of starting a business that we've all heard about from movies and things, although that does exist for certain things like in Silicon Valley, that's not usually the model that one employs in the wider world, in other industries. That's kind of the reality of these things. And as always, I'm going to play around with my camera brightness. That's kind of the thing that I do because I'm using the very latest in technology here, and I'm not too ashamed to admit it. So that's the cool thing about this. Right? And what I would recommend, and I'm not the only one here, a lot of the conventional wisdom for this, and this is what you learn in business school if you take things like entrepreneurship, and this is what's borne out in the real world, is that you kind of do the opposite of that, right? Instead of like raising a ton of cash and focusing all your efforts on getting financing, which a lot of times essentially means just going to a bank and getting loans, right? That's what it usually amounts to for a lot of small business, right, and startups. Instead of focusing on that, instead, you actually work on the business itself. What a radical concept. The idea is that you're going to bootstrap yourself. That means that you make your own money as you go. So how do we make money? We make money by making sales, right, in some way, shape, or form. And that can include, offering something to the public, or it could even include selling your company to someone who wants to acquire you, right? But at the end of the day, it's sales, right, that drives these things. That's what brings cash in. If you can't create something that generates enough cash through sales to keep itself going, then it's ultimately doomed to failure. Despite how much money you get in terms of loans or financing, it's ultimately doomed to failure. It has to be able to generate more cash than it spends. It's very, very simple, right? And so, instead of putting that off till a later stage and saying, I'm not going to worry about that now, my immediate focus is to get a ton of money, a ton of financing to sustain myself. Instead, you front load that. You say, listen, at the end of the day, this business idea I have it's going to be made or broken by whether or not I can make money or not. If I can bring in more money than I spend, then it's profitable. It's as simple as that. So let's work on that problem first. Before we do anything fancy, let's see if on day one, we can create something, even on a very, very small scale. Okay, something like, even if it's a business of one person, can I create something that brings in more money than I spend? Now, if the answer is yes, then I stand a fighting chance. Maybe I could scale this up so that I'm bringing in a lot more money than I'm spending. Okay, maybe I'm spending a lot more money because I'm doing something much more intricate on a larger scale, but I'm bringing in proportionally more money, right? So I not only sustain myself, but I can keep this going. And what's more important is that it shows promise. It validates the idea that this idea that I have is worth pursuing. Right? We don't know if this is a good idea or a bad idea when we have an idea. We think it's good, but we don't know if it's going to work as a business, right? And the real relevant question is we don't know, not necessarily if the idea is going to work, but specifically, we don't know whether we can make the idea work as a business, right? That's a much more a much different question. I can't tell you how many pitches I've sat through, like in business school and stuff, where I've been the instructor, and I've listened to students give a pitch for their business idea. And they say, we're going to go into business doing this. And then they have to sort of back that up with evidence and make a persuasive argument for like why that looks promising, right? And their arguments always center around, there's a lot of potential with this idea. There's a big market for it, or, whatever. But it doesn't answer the central question that, say, most investors, for example, would care about, is that they're sold on the idea, like this thing you want to go into business doing. They're sold on that. They know that that's going to be big, right? Or it is big. What they're not sold on is whether you can pull it off, right? That's a different question. You could say, real estate. I'm going to go into real estate. I'm going to buy and sell property, and I'm going to make a lot of money, right? So you should invest in me, or you should join me, or whatever you want, right? Now, someone may say, yes, I agree. Real estate is a legitimate business. There are a lot of people that make a lot of money in real estate, right? But that's not what I'm focused on. I'm focused right now on figuring out whether you can make a real estate business work, right? Who are you? Have you done anything previous? What evidence can you bring that suggests that you can pull this off? Because what I think is a likely outcome is that many people are going to be making money in real estate, but you may lack the skills or the knowledge or the networking connections or the education or the natural ability or the personality to be able to pull it off, right? So that's a big part of validation. Validation is, you're not just evaluating the idea. That's usually the easy part. I've seen a lot of people quote a lot of economic data and say, there's millions of people in this situation, therefore that's billions of dollars of potential to sell things to them. Yeah, I agree. But can you pull it off? Right now, if you said, okay, well, I've already made sales with 10 customers. I've got pre-orders where people have paid in advance. I've got their invoices right here, the receipts, to show that I can pull this off. That would be different. That would be a lot more convincing, right? So that's the idea, right? This is the idea. You front load the problem itself and say, look, if this is going to work, we need to show that it can bring in money, and it can bring in more money than we need to spend to get it off the ground, right? So let's do that first before we worry about hiring people, before we worry about borrowing money, taking out loans, or getting financing through some other channel, right? Let's show that we can make sales in a sustained way, right? Where we're not spending more money than we're bringing in, right? So that's the idea. So that's what I'd recommend. So when we talk about how to start and scale your business with minimal investment, this is the approach I'm talking about. This is not very original, but it's very, very wise. And this has led to this tactic or this strategy being adopted for many types of businesses across many types of industry. It may not be the Silicon Valley model, but it is the model that people tend to adopt in many, many areas. Now, a common pushback, a common sort of like reply to this from people who are skeptical is that they'll say, well, that's just unrealistic because what I'm trying to do requires me to spend a lot of money. I need, in order to do this business or this idea, I need to spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars to create, let's say it's a product. They need to create the manufacturing of that product. They need to do R&D to design a product. That's going to require, a very long period of experimentation. That's going to require resources. You might even have to pay people, this kind of thing, right? They say, well, it's just unrealistic you saying that, we shouldn't get financing first. We should try and bootstrap it ourselves, right? That's a very common counter argument to this when people hear it. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction, in my opinion. And what I'd say is two things to that. Okay, first one is that there's a principle here, and that is that big business exists to solve big problems, whereas small business exists to solve small problems, right? So for example, a company like Amazon or Walmart, like when you think of big companies, Boeing, like big companies, Toyota, that have like thousands upon thousands of employees. They have operations distributed over like, different countries, things like this. They exist to solve big problems. If you're trying to sell 1 million cars in a year that you've built yourself, right? That's not something one person can do in a garage. That's a big problem. If you're trying to design and sell jet airliners to the airlines of the world, that's not something one person can do in a garage. That's a big problem, And that's why big companies exist, to solve the big problems. That's what they tackle. That's their purpose, right? If you're trying to start a business yourself, presumably with like one employee yourself, or possibly, a couple of partners, you and one or two close associates that are going to be partners, something like that, right? It's a small operation. The idea is that you're going to tackle a small problem. You're not going to take on something that's going to require millions of dollars of tooling to manufacture, right? Or if it's service provision, like you're not making a product, you're offering a service. It's not something that, you're going to need millions of dollars to be able to deliver a service. You're going to need to have like 100 locations across the country. You're going to need to have thousands of employees. Like that's not something on the scale that a small company can do. I know this seems self-evident, but you'd be surprised how many people, they have this vision of what they're going to do. They're going to start a business, and it's going to do this like totally lofty thing that's going to require insane amounts of money and lots of people, and they're just imagining that they're going to hire all these people and they're going to, spend all this money on stuff, and they think like, okay, yeah, I could pull this off, especially when they haven't done anything like it before, And I would say, no. If you're starting a business, you're starting a one-person business, you have very limited resources, you're going to tackle a small problem. A small problem is like, okay, taking something that other people are already doing and you're offering it, but in a different location, a different region or something like that. Or, you're doing something that nobody else is doing, but you're doing it, it's just a sort of very small add-on to a product or an industry or an ecosystem that other people have created. So you're sort of riding on the back of it, right? Or you're doing something that there's a lot of money involved in that business, but you're doing something very lightweight like consulting, where you don't actually have to worry about products. You're not manufacturing anything, and you are offering a service, but the service is something you can offer. You can offer with like a computer, a phone, and a desk. Not a lot of barriers to entry to get your way in, right? So those would be considered small problems, right? So that's the first principle. The first principle, the counter argument to why you wouldn't do this, people say, no, I need tons of financing. I have to borrow millions to get this off the ground. That's their reaction. And I would say, well, number one, you're choosing the wrong challenge. You're picking a challenge that's much bigger than what you have resources for. Leave that to bigger companies, at least in the beginning. You start with something that you can deliver as a one-person operation, and you can make money doing it. Not only can you provide whatever it is, a product or a service or a combination thereof, but you can also sell it, right? You're doing all that yourself. Focus on something that's the appropriate scale in the beginning, right? The other counter argument, when people say, no, I need tons of financing to get this off the ground, another big problem with that argument, they challenge that, and I have to I have to think of oh, we got some people here. Alpine's Pal. Hey, Bill. Hey, Alpine's Pal. And Northern Nomad is here. Hey, company's expert. Excuse me. Hey, everybody. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. And if you have any questions, please let me know. So the recommendation is that you front load your actual business problem. Instead of taking out a ton of financing and focusing on that, instead, you focus on the actual business problem. You see if you can bootstrap it. You can get it started with a minimal amount of money and resources. And then you validate the idea by saying, look, I've already got money coming in the door. I've already made sales. Okay, that validates the idea. That means that there is indeed a demand for it. There are customers out there that want this. I know who those people are. I know where they are. I can reach them and I can convince them to do business with me. I'm validating several of these like pieces all in a row, right? And then on top of that, if, what I always recommend is you adopt the business model that you would encounter when you go to the store, right? How does it work when you go to the store? You go up to the cash register and, you say, I want to buy this. And they say, okay, you pay me money and then I will allow you to walk out of the store with it. Excuse me. So in a sense, you pay up front, right? Now that differs from the way a lot of businesses do business, where they provide whatever it is. Somebody says, I want to buy this from you. You say, sure, here you go. Right? And then I'll send you an IOU at the end of the month. I'll send you, a bill that says you owe me for that thing that I gave you. Right? So you get the cash in arrears. You provide the product up front. Here you go. And then 1 month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, they send cash. Right? They send you a check. Check's in the mail. Right? That's not what I recommend. I recommend that you adopt the model where people pay up front, right? And sometimes they prepay, which is even better. Because first of all, if you say, listen, I'm offering this. Now, if you want one, you pay, and then I send it to you, right? And you could even explain, like, well, I will send it to you, and there'll be a little delay. You'll get yours in 6 to 8 weeks, right? There'll be a little delay, right? And what this does is it gives you something else. It actually gives you money up front so that you can use that cash to then, pay for inventory and resources and things like this to then produce the product, right? So you don't have the problem of like, okay, I've made sales, but I haven't received any cash yet. I now have to go and produce a product or provide a service, in the hopes that these people will pay me later like they're supposed to, right? But in the meantime, I have to come up with the cash to finance all of this, right? You have the opposite situation where they pay you an upfront, and then you use that cash to be able to finance the things you need, right? And then you just deliver it to them, right? So that's the other advantage of doing this, right? You're not only validating the process, but you're actually getting the financing itself to be able to get you started. Alpine's Palace says, I bought a balloon from Dollar Tree that said, you're awesome on it. Did it have a picture of my face on it? Or my face pointing at you? That would be the other thing that we need to produce. You never know. They say your first million's the hardest to make. You could come up with that idea. And it'll be like an unofficial, the company's expert bootleg product. And you make your first million that way on the gray market, shall we say. Yeah, well, that's good. That was, I said it, I think last week, that's how I use that, like, you're awesome as a sign off for a lot of my early videos. And I actually got a lot of hate for that. I got people saying, how dare you presume to know me to tell me I'm awesome when you don't know who the hell, who I am. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. That just shows how fake you are. I mean, I use that as an example to illustrate to people that no matter what it is you do, that you put out there, there's always going to be people that will have a problem with it. I regarded it as a very positive thing, just universally. I couldn't understand why anybody would have a problem with that, but apparently several people did. So the moral of the story is that, you kind of just have to ignore that. There's going to be a certain amount of negativity, no matter what you put out there, a certain amount of noise, and you just have to ignore it. I think if you paid attention to everything, you would never do anything, And that is a valid thing that enters a conversation when we talk about businesses, doing something, putting something out there. So there you go, Alpine's pal. There is a moral lesson in the middle of that story that you brought up with the balloon thing. Even though that was probably a joke, we still turned it into a lesson anyway, of sorts. But thank you for mentioning that. That's nice to hear. Okay, if you are watching this and you want to learn business, as you can see on your screen, I do have courses, and this one in particular is if you want to learn business, check out that course. There is no better bang for the buck. This is a self-study course. Basically, what it's doing is it's giving you a reading list. It's giving you all the textbooks that you would be reading anyway if you took a brick and mortar MBA, a 2-year MBA program from a university. Okay, that's an MBA is a Master's of Business Administration. It's the gold standard for learning business, the world over. And, when you take one of these, you master business. You understand how business works. So, if you were to take a brick and mortar program, it can be quite expensive a lot of time. Even today, even online courses, like you're paying, around $10,000 kind of minimum, US. That's kind of, as is my understanding, the prices right now. Now, I'm open for people for being corrected if you guys know of any of that's not strictly true, but paying for an accredited online MBA, even an online MBA is like $10,000. Now, if you go with an actual brick and mortar face-to-face experience 2-year program at a university, you're paying a lot more than that, right? And I've always had a problem because most of what you learn in an MBA is in the public domain. It's like learning high school mathematics. Would you pay someone $100,000 to teach you high school mathematics? You could argue that, you don't need to spend that much money to learn that. You know what I mean? It's not rocket science. It's very useful information, but it's not rocket science. You don't need Albert Einstein himself to be able to teach you this. It's like learning your times tables. Do you need Albert Einstein to teach you that? No. So I've always maintained that, listen, this stuff, there should be cheaper, more convenient options to give people this knowledge, right? And when we talk about entrepreneurship, like we're doing here, we're not talking in terms of learning business to give you a fancy degree to try and impress somebody with your credentials. We're talking about learning business to give you the knowledge to be able to succeed. You're going to be using that knowledge intrinsically. You're going to be applying it yourself. You're not trying to impress anyone with your knowledge. You're learning it so you can apply it, so it can solve a problem for you, which is getting your own business off the ground, right? If you want to know how to succeed in business, learn business. You know what I mean? That's kind of the idea. So I created this course. It can serve a variety of different purposes. People might want to learn business for different reasons, right? For example, you might be thinking of taking an actual brick and mortar MBA for like $50,000 upwards, but you might just want to put your toe in the water and see what it is you're going to be learning. And if you're kind of into it, if it holds your interest, so you spend $100 and you take this, right? So anyway, if you are looking to learn business, check that out. Okay. Link in the description. Best bang for the buck around. What you do is you get the reading list. You could then order the textbooks for very cheap off places like Amazon. You can get slightly older editions. You could get the books for like literally $5. And then you read them yourself and you go to the depth to which you're interested. And you do it entirely on your own schedule, on your own terms. And, you learn the knowledge, you learn the tools of how this stuff works. And then you can apply it in your life. Either you could work as an employee, and this will just help you understand your employer, how your employer thinks, and what's important to your employer and what's less important. Or you could leave that whole world behind and become an entrepreneur and start your own business and use that knowledge to help you succeed in making money yourself directly. So there's a variety of purposes for it. Check out that course, link in the description. And I have made videos that talk about the course so you can see how it works, what you're getting, all that kind of stuff before you commit to it. Excuse me, I still have a throat thing that I'm still getting over. Northern Nomad says, people will always have problems with one another in society, both personally and professionally. Yes, they will. They will. They will. It seems like we're, in the last 20 years, we've definitely gone further in that direction. I mean, I remember the 80s and stuff, and generally speaking, people were a little bit more civil to each other, and they could actually tolerate dissenting opinions a bit more politely and things than we can now. In a very general sense, I think there's been a major shift, and I'm not the only one. Alpine's Pal says, can you explain the law of demand again? If there is an excess demand, is that a good thing? Well, it's not about like good or bad. I mean, that's a concept in economics, like supply and demand, right? I don't know what you're referencing in terms of what I said earlier where I touched on that. Maybe I can't remember what I said that might have tied in with this, but the idea is that I think maybe where the connection was when I was talking about value. Like, for example, if you want to be in business, you want to make money. It's regarded, I regard it, and many other people regard it as a very good thing, because what you're doing is you're saying, listen, if I can create value, if I can create something that other people want, okay, they want it because presumably it's a good thing for them. It solves a problem that they have, right? They want a better version of this. The version that they have, the thing that they're using now, it's like the best solution that they know of, but it really isn't that good. It's inconvenient, it's expensive, it's unreliable, it's unsafe, whatever. There's like some problem with it. It could be better, right? So you decide, listen, I'm going to create that better version of it. I have a vision of like how this could be better. I've been using this thing for years, and I know that, there's a lot of flaws with the best solutions we have available to us. I'm going to create a better solution, something that actually is reliable, or it's much more efficient, or it's much more convenient, or it doesn't break down, or it's not as wasteful or not as annoying, or like some negative thing. I'm going to create a version that's better, right? Look at, I don't know, there's any number of examples. Look at Dyson. Was it that guy Dyson? He invented the vacuum cleaners, right? You could buy a vacuum cleaner for I don't know, $50, that would vacuum your floor, right? And this dude said, you know what? I got a better idea. Yeah, it's a vacuum cleaner. People that have to clean their home, they use a vacuum cleaner every couple of days or whatever, and, they use it, but are they excited about it? Does it do a fantastic job? No. It's loud. It's dirty. It's inconvenient. It's heavy to push around. It gets blockages and, picks up stuff off the carpet. It eats your carpet. It's very imperfect and ineffective in certain ways, where I'm going to create a product that, it's like a super vacuum cleaner. Not only is it better performing, more reliable, quieter, lighter, it doesn't destroy your carpets. It's a pleasure to use, and I'm going to make it shiny. I'm going to make it made out of clear plastic so you can see inside the vacuum cleaner. You can see all the parts working. It's fascinating. I'm going to make this thing look really, really cool, It's going to be a shiny kind of glass, kind of chrome kind of thing, right? And I'm going to charge 10 times the price. And I'm going to say to people, listen, if you want a premium vacuum cleaner, you could buy a Joe $50 vacuum cleaner. But if you want the Cadillac of vacuum cleaners, the thing that, actually gives you a buzz when you use your vacuum cleaner, you will feel some kind of arousal when you use this thing because it is so cool, right? If that's you, well, here's the solution, right? And this guy made a fortune. It's like Starbucks saying, okay, I know you can buy coffee, right? For like $1 a cup or whatever. But I got this plan. I'm going to sell you coffee for $10 a cup, but it's going to be the most fantastic coffee you've ever had. And I'm going to do it in such a way that the person serving you the coffee doesn't want to kill themselves and you, which I don't think you've ever experienced that before, Right? Like, it's like I have a vision of how I can improve things, right? And these are examples of companies that make like, a premium product. KitchenAid was the same thing. I know this because of my wife. You have a mixer in your kitchen that you use to like, I don't know, make whipped cream or whatever you use a mixer for in a kitchen. And, you could buy that for like $100, $50, whatever. This company said, we're going to produce a mixer that costs $500, but it's going to be made out of beautiful chrome metal. It's going to be polished up nice like your car, like a 1950s car with the wings on it and those big boats, And, when you turn it on, it sounds like a Harley Davidson motorbike engine. It's like, oh, right? It sounds beautiful as opposed to sounding like, you want to go deaf voluntarily, right? So there's so many examples, like a DeWalt, let's take a drill or a hammer, let's charge you 10 times the price and let's make it a designer hammer that you use to build a house. You know what I mean? So, these are mundane examples, but there are many examples of people that have said, I can come up with a better version of that, right? And there's nothing nefarious about it. It's not about scamming people or conning people. It's like, you're genuinely delighting people by saying, here, you've been using hammers for 20 years to like hammer nails into walls or to other people's heads, whatever you use a hammer for. Now you can do it with style. We're going to give you a hammer. You're going to be so blinded by the shine off this hammer that you will pay 10 times as much for it, right? You'll get your own custom holster for that hammer so you can carry it around, and feel proud, right? So, people that have had visions like this and said, I'm going to do that, and they make a ton of money, right? Because their customers believe that like, wow, that is amazing. I get a lot of value out of that. I want that, and I'm willing to pay. Apple computer, you could buy Joe PC that does it for you, or you could pay 10 times the price and buy an Apple, like whatever, right? Does basically the same thing, but it's shiny, So anyway, there's that kind of thinking, right? Now that's one type of entrepreneurship. There are many other types. You can compete on price and do something more efficient, right? But these are examples of that. So I think that's what I was talking about earlier. So you're saying like, can you explain the law of demand? It's if you can create something of value to people, when they see it, they want it. It ties into something they want or they need. They see it, they recognize that, they're willing to pay money. They want to pay money for it because they want that thing. Right? Now, if you can have a vision of what that is and then deliver on that vision, you can create a lot of value and therefore make a lot of money. Alpine's Pal says, in my high school finance class, the video said that there is a perfect balance, for example, a TV price, but the government may bar the total price by $200 to make it affordable, but then that'd ruin the business. I didn't quite get it. Well, I think you might be talking about like price controls and things like that. I mean, the bottom line is that, I'm not really doing an economics class here, but, there's supply and demand. Go look it up. Go to Google or ChatGPT and say, explain supply and demand. That's where you have consumer behavior. They want to buy more of something that's cheaper, all things being equal, right? And then, so you have like a graph, it goes like, it goes like that. It goes like the opposite, as the quantity gets higher, as the price gets lower, the quantity goes up because they want to buy more of something that's cheaper, right? And then you have supplier behavior, which is the opposite. They're trying to sell things. So they want to sell more of a product that costs more. So you get the opposite graph. They're the opposite line or whatever. As the price goes up, they want to sell more of it, right? Because they make more money, when it's more expensive. So you have these two behaviors. Now, what happens in like a sort of a free market is you get an equilibrium point, right? And then because these two behaviors are opposite. So they reach an equilibrium. So at that point where these two lines intersect, these two behavior curves, you get an equilibrium. So at that price, at that quantity, that's what we see actually being sold, right? So that's the idea. That's supply and demand. Now you can tinker with that. You can, if you're a government, like a lawmaker, you could say, I'm going to create a law that says you are not allowed to sell that product for, less than this price or more than this price or something like that. So you're creating like a surplus or a shortage, and all this kind of thing. So you can monkey around with it, but ultimately, a lot of economists would say, well, that creates problems, right? Because people want to buy it, but you're not producing enough of it, right, at that price point. Or you're producing a lot of it, but it's not being sold, And these have negative consequences. If people can't get it, it's being sold for a certain price, but there's the shelves of the stores are empty, then that's where you get like black market activity, gray market activity. There's all kinds of offshoot effects of these things, right? So anyway, but that's economics. That's not really finance. Anyway, I'm not sure if my explanation was any good, but if I understand what you're referring to, that's what they're talking about. But it's called supply and demand. Go and look that up. Probably the best way to do it, just go to ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok or one of those things and just say, explain this to me, and it'll break it down. And, if you don't understand a certain part, just keep asking questions and it'll break it down and it'll make sure you understand. Anyway, so just to recap, so today we're talking about how to start and scale your business with minimal investment. So my recommendation, and this is not particular to me, this is a common thing, is instead of going out and thinking of getting financing, getting money, and then spending that money on things that might not be smart, things that are irrelevant, that don't really help you get your business off the ground. That's what a lot of people do that make this mistake. They'll, spend all their money on like a fancy office somewhere. They don't know how to get a customer, but they've got like a really fancy office space with like, granite countertops and, all this kind of stuff. It's like totally unnecessary. And you're borrowing that money. So you're going into debt doing that. It's not the smartest way to do things. Instead of taking out a ton of financing, learn to bootstrap your business. Start very small and focus purely on offering something of value and making sales, having money come in, The other thing is that to validate an idea, you don't necessarily have to produce the thing that you're going to sell, right? Because when you think about it, you're basically promising potential customers. You're saying, look, are you interested in this? Almost like Amazon. Like think of Amazon. You go to Amazon as a website. You can order something off a website, right? Now you see a picture of it and they say it costs a certain amount of money. Now, if you want this, pay us the money and then we'll send it to you, right? They don't have that thing necessarily in their hand when they offer this for sale. They're saying, well, we could get it for you. If you want this and you buy it from us, then we can get it for you and then send it to you, right? That's the principle behind things like drop shipping, right? You don't actually have that item in stock in your warehouse, right? You say, if you want this, I can get it for you, right? That avoids you having to do anything until somebody buys it, right? So the point is you don't have to produce the thing necessarily to sell it if you're just trying to prove demand. Maybe it's something that you could produce if people want it. So in order to test to see if that idea makes any sense, you offer it for sale. You say, hey, I've got this. Now it costs this much, and here's how you order. So if you want one, order it from me. right? Now you haven't like actually created this thing yet. You could if there was demand for it, if people wanted to buy them, right? So the idea is like you can offer this upfront. You can do the sales part, the marketing part first, and say, I could produce this. Now, does anyone want one? Now, let's say nobody wants it. Well, it's a good thing that you didn't spend a bunch of time and effort and money producing 100 units of it because you couldn't sell any of them, right? But you validated that. You put it out there and you tried to make it work, but nobody bought any, right? But you try again with a different thing. You say, I offer this for sale. It's this price. Do you want it? Now, you haven't actually produced it, but you could if people want it, right? And this time, you get 100 orders. You've sold 100 units at $10 a piece or whatever, right? So you've essentially got $1,000 that showed up in your bank account, and you got 100 people saying, I want one, right? So now that you've got $1,000 in your bank account, what you've essentially done is you've proven that there's demand, right? You've shown that there are people out there that do want this, right? You've then shown that, like, I know who those people are, and I can reach them, and I can convince them to buy it from me, right? You've proven all of those different things, right? So then the idea is like, okay, if I've shown that, and I've got money coming in, this is all based on the assumption that you're selling it for a legitimate price, right? You sold them for $10 a unit, right? Presumably it doesn't cost you $30 a unit to make it. That would be stupid. Why would you offer it for $10? You would offer it for like 35 or 40 or some number above 30, right? If it costs you $30 to make each unit, right? Okay, so it's assuming that you've offered like a reasonable price for it, right? And you've been honest about what it is, right? You know, there's some assumptions built in here that you're not, lying about anything, right? So you're honest about what it is. You're charging a reasonable price for it. You're charging more than it costs you to make each unit. And if you've then sold like, what was it? You've sold 100 of them at $10 a piece. That's $1,000. You now even have the cash to pay for inventory, pay for materials or whatever it is, tooling, whatever it is you need, right? To then fill this order, right? Pay for shipping costs, etc. Right? That's the idea. So the reason why you would do this is you're validating the idea. And if you put the sales sort of part first, if it turns out there's no demand for it, it's actually quite efficient in that you didn't blow a ton of money trying to validate this idea. You realize, okay, nobody seems to be going with that. There's definitely a problem. Either there's no demand for this product, or there is demand, but I don't know who those people are, that market, that audience. I don't know who they are that would want this. And I certainly haven't been able to reach them, and if I have reached them, and these are the people that would buy it, I haven't been successful in persuading them to buy it. Maybe I'm not really communicating properly that, this is what I have for sale or something, and, this is a legitimate thing or, whatever, right? There's some problem in that process. So, if the idea fails and you don't get anyone ordering it, it's good that you didn't spend a ton of time and money producing it, right? So that's a common method of getting these business ideas off the ground. You front load the big challenge, which is, can you sell it? And if the answer is yes, and you do in fact sell it, then it might be worth proceeding to step 2, which is actually producing it and meeting those demands. If you decide not to, you can always say, oh, I'm sorry, we've had a supply problem. Here's your money back. I can't fulfill this order. Sorry for the inconvenience. Here's your money back. That's what people do. You keep everything above board, of course. The goal here is not to scam people. So, but that's quite a efficient way of doing this. And you only proceed when you know that you've got a winning formula. Alpine's Pal says, I like to think of it as making bridges, and you want more bridges to lead to you, or you want to own the bridges and sell tickets to ride them. Yeah, you want to add value to people. If people have a need for a bridge, you know what I mean? They want to get a certain place, and you build the bridge and you charge people to go over top of it, and they feel it's worth it, then fair enough. It's a legitimate thing, and they're willing to pay for it and all the rest, you know? So, yeah. Anyway, there are 9 people here. Let me know if you guys have any questions. We've reached the hour mark. I'm going to wind this down in a moment. But if you have any questions, get in the chat. Later this afternoon, I'm doing a live stream, a collaboration with another YouTuber, Abby, from the YouTube channel Life Work Balance. Every 2 weeks on Monday, we do a collaborative live stream where we answer people's questions. So that's coming up in an hour from right now on my channel, on her channel. I'm actually streaming it on 2 of my channels. As you might be able to see from here, I have 2 other YouTube channels, the Company's Expert 2 and the Company's Expert 3. If you want more business type content, entrepreneurial type content on how you can start businesses and things like this, check out the Company's Expert 3. That's where I put a lot more of this type of content. So go there and subscribe to that. As I said earlier, if you want to learn business yourself, check out this course. The $100 MBA provides you the same value as a real MBA, a brick and mortar MBA where you go to a university and take a 2-year program. Okay, you learn the same material that you learn in my courses because you're using the same source material. You're reading the textbooks. My course is a self-study course, however, which means that, you're not doing it in a classroom. You're not doing it with, an instructor or whatever. I do provide you videos where I walk you through some of the material. I give you my own takes on the material. But basically, what you're doing is you're reading textbooks. You're reading the same textbooks they read in an MBA program in university. And not just any MBA program, but you're using some of the best textbooks in the world, the ones they use in places like Harvard Business School in their MBA, and some of the top MBA schools around the world, including in the Ivy League schools in the States. So you're just doing that by ordering the exact books from Amazon. They are available. I'm giving you the reading list and all the links to them, and then I'm guiding you through it. So $100, and you get that. And you can do it entirely on your own schedule and on your own terms. There are no tests, no evaluations, no projects, no exams. So you can only learn the areas you're interested in if that's the way you want to go. Or you could just do the whole thing and get the same result as taking an MBA. So entirely up to you. Check out that. There's a link in the description underneath. And step into the world of business where you learn how to make money. That's what business is. The scientific study of how to make money. It's useful to know for a variety of reasons. Alpine's Pal says, I'm just thinking out loud of Shark Tank. I get the impression that you'd be lucky if your business was successful from that. Maybe it's just overly polished or less productive for a consumer. Yeah, I'm not super familiar with Shark Tank because I believe that's the American version. There's, what do they call it? There's like a British version, but it's not called Shark Tank. It's called something else. I can't remember. It's been a few years since I like saw that. I mean, yes, it's like a pitch. It's like a pitch to investors, but it's very Hollywoodized. It's very like dramatic for TV. Not necessarily the most realistic from a business perspective. But that's the British version I'm referring to. I'm not referring to Shark Tank. My understanding is Shark Tank is the American version of it. So, yeah. I mean, some of the principles are sound, but some of them are very artificially dramatic for TV purposes. So, Lion's Den. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Northern Nomad. Absolutely. Yeah, I believe that was it. I can't remember. Like, there's a Canadian one. There's a British one. I remember they had one with Theo Prophetus in it, whichever one that was. If that was the British version or that was the Canadian version, I can't remember. But yeah. So definitely. But once again, that's pitching to investors. That's not the same thing as what I'm basically talking about here, which is bootstrapping yourself, right? You see, the problem with investors is that, in general, is that it's a little bit of a catch-22. The only time they feel comfortable fronting you cash is when you don't need it because you've completely validated your idea, you've got it off the ground, and you're doing it. That's the ultimate proof, the ultimate validation that you can do it. But by that point, if you got to that point, you would no longer need their investment because you are generating your own revenue, right? That's the idea. If you're revenue positive, you no longer need, like, generally speaking, like a ton of investment. Certainly seed capital, you don't need that anymore, right? So when you really need that investment, it's implied that you're at a stage before you've validated what you're going to do. And if you haven't validated what you're going to do, most investors, being risk averse, will not be interested, right? So the only time they give you money is when you don't need it. That's the reality of getting investors, especially for higher risk type investments, right? And a lot of entrepreneurship falls under the higher risk category to varying degrees. So that's the problem with that, right? So that's why it's usually considered a better strategy to not go after financing, not go after things like investment, and instead work on creating something that starts making you money from day one. You do a stripped down version of it, that can bring money in. And then as you're revenue positive, you're having money coming in the door, then you gradually build, you scale up, right? If you had to really strip back your idea to get it off the ground, do one piece of it, then you would add the other pieces, right? And the example I've used before is like saying, okay, let's say you had a vision of, I'm going to found my own restaurant. Okay, just something cliched like that. Now, a real restaurant costs a lot of money. Either you have to lease the land or you have to build the actual building, or, whichever way you slice it, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars usually to get it off the ground. Now, that's not something you can finance yourself if you're just sort of starting your own business. But what you can do is you can strip it down. You could say, what piece of this could I do? Well, a restaurant is a combination of many businesses. There's the actual food. It's like you're selling a product, right? Then there's the sort of dining experience. It's more of like a service, right? It's the room and the service and the atmosphere and the location, those are all sort of combined into the experience, right? And then there's maybe like a delivery service, so you can, depending on what type of restaurant it is, there could be a drive-through or a delivery service. So which part of that could you start yourself? A lot of people might say, listen, the way I'm going to start is I'm going to start with the food. I'm going to create this special type of burger or, whatever, coffee, whatever. And I'm going to sell it to grocery stores as a frozen product. That's something that I can get off the ground with very little money. Certainly a lot less money than like opening an entire restaurant, right? But we're going to work on the food thing first. We're going to create some food that, like, everybody who tastes it loves it and is hooked and they want more. That's the first challenge, right? How many restaurants do you know that have gone out of business that had truly amazing food? I'm willing to bet you can't think of any. You could probably think of a lot of restaurants that went out of business that their food was kind of meh. Okay. But like a truly amazing, food at a place, name me one that like went out of business. Usually you usually can't. It's very rare. So we're going to work on that. And once we create this thing that's like, everyone loves it, everyone can't get enough, then we're going to scale up. We're going to offer a delivery service, or we're going to offer, a drive-through or something like that. And then if that gets off the ground, that's revenue positive. Then we're going to scale up to where we have our own restaurant. Something like that. You organize it into baby steps, right? So the advantage is that, you prove one piece of the puzzle, you solve that problem, we create the product. and the product is selling and it's making money. And only then do we then try and scale up, right? So rather than starting taking out a loan from the bank for $500,000 and then starting a restaurant and just hoping that the food you offer is good enough and the service you offer is good enough when you haven't tried it before, that's like trying to get a hole-in-one in golf, right? Very risky. Instead, break the problem down into its pieces, focus on one piece at a time, something you can do, work on that, and then you only proceed when that's validated. It's cheaper, it's less risky, and it has many advantages. So there you go. Anyway, so that was for I think that was responding to Alpine's Pal. There's always an old timer. No, where was it? Anyway, I kind of lost track of where I was here, but people are saying I'm just thinking about Shark Tank, Lion's Den, yep. Dragon's Den, that was it. That's the UK version, I believe, because they referred to the investors as the dragons or something. Yeah, that's going back a few years. But anyway, Alpine's Pal says, there's always an old-timer smith who knows how to make a solution that makes more sense for your particular needs rather than the mass population. Okay? Well, sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, right? Alpine's Pal, Dragon's Den, Shark Tank, Australia, yes. Annie2385 says, hi, sorry, came in late. Can you talk about the different funding rounds? No, I can't. That's not what we're doing today. And I'm in the process of winding this down, actually. I have spoken about that before. But what I basically did today was basically convince people that in most scenarios, like when you're starting up your business, that's the opposite of what you want to do. That's kind of more the Silicon Valley model for high-risk, innovative startups. That's not the way you would start, like, say, a traditional business. You want to work in the construction industry. It's in most situations, it's not what you want to do. It actually is totally unsuited to starting up most businesses for a lot of reasons that I've already given in the last hour. So, yeah. But for innovative tech startups, you have to be located in certain places where the financing is located. Places like Silicon Valley, places like Boston. Even where I am in Canada, there are different cities across Canada where they have different, sort of startup landscapes. And you would go to places like Toronto or Vancouver where, you have the financing there, right? The people that, the venture capitalists, the angel investors, like there's a sort of ecosystem there. You would go there. And that would only be for very specific types of businesses. And it almost becomes like, getting a job through networking. It's like the same type of thing because a lot of the stuff happens through networking, it's really rare that you actually get like true pitch competitions and things like that to decide like actual investment for those type of things. Alpine's Palace is like saying I can bake my own pie by getting stuff from the same store that sells pie at the baker, but nobody really cares about me at that point. I don't understand quite what you mean. If you want to make a better product, you still can. There's no substitute for brains and for knowing your market, like knowing the customers, right? Maybe there is something you can make using off-the-shelf ingredients or something that these people would really, really like, this is why, I don't know, I think this is why people go to culinary school and stuff for years and years to learn how to cook and make recipes and things, because they know what they're doing, you know what I mean? So it's very hard for a total novice to stumble upon this fantastic, recipe for a thing that no one's ever thought of before but them. That very rarely happens, But I wouldn't say it's impossible. It does happen. Anyway. which makes me think that in this case, School of Thinking Products needs more value instead of branding and popularity. It needs to actually work and work good. Yeah, that's what business is. It delivers value. Something that people legitimately want, that they want to pay for. They want to pay for because either it fulfills a want or it fulfills a need. It's very simple. So if you can create something that's how they feel about, right? That's the definition of value. They're willing to pay for it. They want it or they need it, right? And then you communicate that value to them. You say, hey, I'm here. I got this. It costs this. Now, who wants one, right? Essentially, that a version of that message, you're communicating the value to the people who would be interested in it. They get what they want. You get what you want. They get a solution to whatever it is that want or need they have, and you get money. It's a mutually beneficial thing. So that's really what business is at its fundamental level. You're creating something that has value, and the more value you create, the more money you make. It's just that simple, right? So it encourages people to think in these terms and to look at the world. That's what entrepreneurs do. Now, if you like that idea, you kind of find that inspiring, I'm here to fan the flames of that and say, listen, go learn about business. I'm not trying to plug a course. Yes, I have a course on that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about go learn business. See, business is the scientific study of how to make money, right? And one area of business is called entrepreneurship, and it talks about this very thing, looking for opportunities. Maybe you notice that, the existing solutions are really not that good for this particular thing. You think, hey, I believe I can make a better version of that. Or you see a need for something there is no solution for it, but you think I think I know what the solution to that might look like, and I think I can create that, So entrepreneurship is they look for those opportunities, and then, you validate to see if that's going to work, and then you deliver, right? And that way you can create a thing where you make money. It meets a need, right? So anyway, I encourage you to learn all about that. That's what I talk about on this live stream. I pretty much have to wrap it up now for here. Thank you to the people who were participating. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, let me know. One way or another, I'm going to be doing business live streams every week. So we can definitely talk about this stuff. And I would encourage you to learn. It's a learning journey. Life is a learning journey. And if you want to work for yourself, you want to make your fortune doing this rather than working as an employee for somebody else, that's a legitimate career path for a lot of people. It's not for everybody, but it's for a lot of people. And I would encourage you to investigate it. Go about doing it in a smart way. Learn your craft. Go about it smart. Don't take huge financial risks. Try things and learn as much as you can. And you never know where this stuff can go. This can be how you make your fortune. So that's where we're going to leave it today. Thank you to everyone that participated. You guys are awesome. I will be live again in 45 minutes on my channel where we talk about job search. So if you're interested in that, come back then. I'm doing a collaboration with another YouTuber that I do every 2 weeks, Abby from the channel Life Work Balance. Anyway, thanks guys. You're awesome. Talk to you soon.